Hello and welcome everyone that's joining us for this outlook of the year. I'm Camilla Bullock and I have the pleasure of leading the Emerging Payments Association Asia, and I'm delighted to see you all here today. And while you're logging on and while we're waiting for some more people, could you please just share in the chat where you're located? And also good to find that chat because we like hearing from you through the call, just if you want to comment on what you hear or in general to do that. We're trying to make this call as interactive as possible, so you can comment on each other's comments, you can hit the emoji button, or there will also be a few times where we're asking you to scan the Slido to vote for what we think and what you think is going to happen in 2026. So we're just 1 month into the year, but it feels like it's already gaining momentum. And at the same time, a couple of weeks away from the Chinese New Year's, which is the year of the horse, if I'm not mistaken. And that actually is the symbol of pace, momentum, and rapid change. And I think that's just what we're going to see this year when we're kicking off what will be a very, very interesting payments year. And today we have invited our advisory board. So this moment maybe advisory board, just give a little wink here, and everybody can try that emoji and give them an applause. And they will throughout the call give their predictions, what they have seen in the crystal ball. And so can we just get that slide up maybe on the advisory board, yeah, so they see who they're going to have on that call? Excellent, thank you very much. And we're very proud of our advisory board and also grateful. Like last year was a momentum year for EPAA, and if the first month of the year is anything to go by, I think that we will have more growth and more impact. And it's just because of the advice we're getting, but also of you. We are so grateful for all members that's coming and showing up in our activities, in our working groups, and where we convene the industry or contributing to our consultation papers. So with that, I would like to also show this slide of our new members that should feel a special welcome. And this is who we have on board over the last couple of months. Fireblocks just joined this week. Super excited about that, and taking a founding member role in our tokenized money working group. We often get questions about what is our ongoing work, and that happens just in our working group. So just show you 2 quick slides. If we just click there, we have 7 active working groups, all a little bit different flavor. And want to call out here, yes, that not on this one, it's on the next one, please. We have from this year a fraud and scam payments working group that came about, 2 founding members here, HSBC and SumSub. And it's really that threat that is growing more and more, and we need to come together and tackle that as an industry. And second one is, as I already alluded to, tokenized money. And we're going to have a first focus on stablecoin and see what myths are out there related to this topic. So I don't think I'm going to stay on working groups anymore. I want to also go on and welcome Monica Yusuya. So Monica Yusuya is my team. She's the Chief Growth and Innovation Officer, and she works closely with members and stakeholders across the region and really sits in that intersection of strategy, innovation, and real-world dynamics. She has a very good viewpoint to be able to comment on all the topics that we're handling. So I'm going to turn to Monica throughout this call to see what she wants to add or what we're doing already. But before diving into that, this is not just a call about what's coming. We also want to put the crown on the sage of last year. So this is a little bit of drum rolls. Last year saw special things and were right. Everybody had something that was right, but this specific person had more things right than others. She will not be on the call today, so she can't continue this streak. So the rest of the advisory board can take the crown from her. And the Sage of the Year in 2025 was Amira. So what she talked about a lot was instant real-time payments acceleration. I think many on the advisory board get that one. stable coins become a major next-gen payments rail, but specifically, she called out geopolitical beginning affected and payments delivery, and she called out things related to trade and touched on those tariffs. That was one thing that she and one other advisory board member had right. Also, Holly Dorber from PayPal spoke to Link about that, something we think we'll see more of. But without further ado, we're going to dive into this. So I'm turning to Monica. Do you guys want to set the scene a little bit of what position do we stand in when we're joining this call now? What have you seen?
Thank you, Camilla. So as far as we are concerned, you showed the working groups. We've been working and discussing with all our members, and we had a call a couple of weeks ago. We heard from the community at large about the topics that obviously we are working on now. But the fact of the matter is that these topics haven't come up just like that. We've been hearing about them. But the three main things that I think are going to be extremely relevant for this year are going to be, and I hear this more often than not. So if I had, the famous saying, if I had a cent for every time I heard this, but it's all about AI. And no, this is not one of those corporate calls where we're discussing AI, but definitely the intersection or the horizontal of how AI is cutting across payments, specifically in the agentic world as well as in frauds. And I say this with a huge amount of responsibility that AI has existed in our world for the longest period of time, but it's taken on this very important role now in outside of payments as well, which is great. But the fact of the matter is that from the policy and regulation point of view, there are significant railguards that are not there. And when we've heard from our members, we've heard this a lot, that as far as, how does APAC respond to agentic commerce? What's going to happen in frauds? Because more countries and governments are becoming more and more vigilant about this. But at the same time, how is AI going to help manage this? And what are some of the frontline players doing about this? And I think those are the areas that I definitely think are happening. But one area that's very close to our heart, because it cuts across, again, a couple of areas, is cross-border payments. We have the privilege of sitting on two task forces with CPMI and the LRS task force, and have a vantage point which is very different. But having said, shifted out because obviously we're not going to be able to meet them. What's very important is that they are, again, cross-border payments is cutting corners, and basically it's cutting across use cases. So cross-border payments, trade, now sanctions, a de-dollarized world, and digitization of commerce, I feel are going to be, again, very relevant topics that cut across major use cases that we manage in payments.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. We have some of the sharpest mind here. So I'm going to, without any delay, just hand over to May Lamb. She's the chair of the EPAA Advisory Board. May, what do you see in your crystal ball?
Thanks, Camilla. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. It is always a privilege to be joining such a diverse group of members and sharing what's the prediction of the year ahead. And I also want to address that this diversity of the members and the guests really reflects today's reality when it comes to payment. Payment has really truly become an ecosystem conversation, not just on silo or by sectors. So today I would like to share with you more from the shift perspective, and maybe one or two that Monica already kind of covered, but with that, I just want to get into what that actually meant for it. So three shifts that I want to share with you that is impacting the world, and also what is the role of payment can be play in 2026. So the first shift that will be from global efficiency to strategic resilience. So as Monica already touched on, and also our stage in 2025, talk about the geopolitical perspective. So this shift is driven by geopolitical fragmentation and a more multipolar world. So the global systems has become more contested. Payments are increasingly treated as a critical infrastructure, not by company, but our government policy maker regulator. So it's not just a commercial service. So by the end of this year, what we see is that the domestic and the regional payment schemes will be collaborating, expanding, and more greater efforts into the interlinking across the borders. So this is not about to replace the global system, but is to reduce the single points of dependencies. And in this environment, value shifts away from a single rail to a rail orchestration. So I think the price is that whether you are a card, real-time, account-to-account, wallet, stablecoin, etc., is that the ability to route payment across schemes, currencies, and jurisdictions in real time. So payment strategy is now become a national resilience strategy. Owning the rail significantly, obviously, is matter, but I think that what is looking at is the controlling the decision about the rail that matters to the end users as well as the regulators. The second shift that would be is that from user-initiated payments to rule-based agent-driven commerce. So Monica and I didn't align before, but I think that we agree on that front. So the second shift that is really with the rise of agentic commerce. And by the end of this year, more payment will be initiated and managed by AI agents, operating with the rules set by consumers and businesses. So for example, the spend limits, the preferred merchants, or the currencies. So this shift is quite significant when you think about it, because it's not about who actually plus the click to pay, but it's who define the rules. So as that becomes a mainstream, trust is become the license to operate, but itself also be challenged. So providers should really think about to prioritize not just the speed and innovation, but on the ability to demonstrate control, accountability, and safety to scale. So yeah, I think there's something that we'll be seeing, whether it's a digital identity perspective, whether it's regulation perspective, and also how the ecosystem come together to tackle that. And then the third shift is from currency dominance to adaptive payments pathways. So this shift is actually borrowing or learning from the economist Ray Dalio's, the long cycle thinking. So for people familiar with that, it's about as that builds and global power becomes more multipolar, currencies tend to change slowly, but payment system adapt fast. I think there's a huge opportunity, could be risk, but for the payment ecosystem to look at it. So for example, I'm borrowing from the US. In the US and part of Europe, the late cycle debt pressures are more visible now. In APAC, this pressure is more uneven. So as a result, adaptation in APAC will show up less as a currency disruption, but more as a diversification in how value moves. So value, not just money. Through the regional rails, the local currency settlement, the regulated stablecoin, tokenized assets settlement, and multi-currency routing. So by end of this, or in this year, the unit of account may look familiar, but the path of moving value across Asia with far more variety and resilience. So payment becomes a more easier, becoming the early signals of this economic structural change. So to wrap it up, that I think taking it together, I think the shift of by end of 2026, payment will wait less about the speed and the convenience, but more to how we manage the resilience, the trust, and the complexity. And this, the calling is that none of this can be achieved alone, but we really have to shift the holistic system thinking together. And I think the conversation like this, how EPAA facilitate and being the convener, being the orchestrator for our region is really invaluable.
Thank you so much. As always, when I sit down in our roundtables or our discussion, I have about 100 questions, and then a new question comes for each sentence you say. But one thing, I mean, it's a lot of interoperability in this and having the standards to be able to talk between systems. But one thing I often think about is like, we still don't have all the definitions. If you would choose one definition to be able to enable this, even what comes to me when you're speaking is that definition of payee in an agentic AI scenario, where does it start and stop? Do you have any things that you feel if we could nail one definition in 2026, what would it be?
Resilience.
Resilience. Oh yeah, that is a good one. That is a very good one. Thank you. I'm going to launch the first Slido question. And it is, what would you like to be the biggest structural shift in payments in 2026? I think this is really relevant to what May was just touching on. And so scan that QR code. Also, the speakers can do it because I'm going to chat to Monica for a little bit. So you have time before we call the next one up. Monica, what stands out to you when May is covering this very broad aspect of what we have to deal with in 2026?
I think the currency dominance piece for me is something that we should be speaking a lot more about. And we're not going into what's happening with the economic cycles and everything else, but there is a fair amount of things that are expected to change. And this is one area and one topic that I'm trying to understand more of. And honestly, if you're not an economist, I think it becomes really hard to understand what the impact might be. I think this is really critical. But I love what May talks about when she talks about resilience. She talks about not having a single part of dependency. I think we're seeing this a lot on our side with real-time payment systems unilaterally, bilaterally, and now multilaterally connecting with each other. And I think that is where we see this actually playing out in the real world. We also saw the same feedback a couple of weeks ago, where this becomes the primary point which people feel will be the reason why cross-border payments will become cheaper, which is these kind of connections. So it's very important to not have these single dependent points of dependency, and resilience needs to be built in. So this really stands out for me.
Excellent, thank you.
And Camilla, if you see the Slido right now, can you see that? I mean, I'm quite surprised, but not as much because we were just speaking about it. But how do you feel about this? Just look at the top choice for our participants. They've talked about networks evolving into multi-rail orchestration platforms. Now, is that a surprise for you when you see this?
Not really when I'm thinking on who's on the line. I think if this was another forum, we would see more votes on the three last ones, but that was covered a lot. So if we're looking at what we need to actually really move ahead, it is that multi-rail orchestration, and also I think it's few people on the line are also taking into account the form factors there. Like if we're going to move ahead with anything that is blockchain based, we need to have that interoperability and orchestration down the line. So yes and no, but it is a good result. It's something that we're going to handle and work on. Talking about networks collaborations, we're going to skip over to the Nordics and Lars Sjögren. Lars Sjögren, could you please give us your crystal ball predictions?
Thank you. Thank you very much. And hi, everyone. I'm in a very chilly and very snowy Stockholm. So if you want to experience winter, come and join me here in Stockholm. For this session, I actually decided to borrow a very Swedish, I would say, cultural tool for making sense in what you could say messy reality. It's the so-called P3 trend spotting. And it's basically a Swedish radio classic where panelists propose a trend and back it with three observations. And I think payments need this because 2026, as many previous years, it's full of noise, right? New rails, new rules, new fintechs, AI everywhere, geopolitics, interoperability, stable coins everywhere. And I think that the hard part is really to decide what actually moves the needle in 2026. I will focus on two trends that in a way look opposite, but I think they belong together. And the first one is that money is now really starting to obey code. And the other one is offline is becoming premium, what you could call prepper payments. And the first trend, money is starting to obey code. You know, we used to talk about money or payments as move value from A to B by very fixed rule books. Now it's much more value with instructions attached. Money start to execute logic, right? And there are three proof points for this that I would like to point to. The first one is that stable coins, they have really graduated from crypto experiments to serious settlement plumbing, right? Banks, they are expanding stable coin settlement capabilities, and many European bank-led initiatives are targeting, I would say, MiCA, it's a market in crypto assets, compliant stable coins with real launch times. So when conservative banks build business cases around new rails, it's not a quest, it's a direction of travel. And then the policymakers, the second proof point, they're just not watching, right? They are in a way reframing the playing field. The digital euro is now about strategic autonomy and the risk of retail payments becoming too dependent on, I would say, USD dominated rails and the card networks and what have you. And they are really start to do development there and implement intelligent rails. So when central bankers start talking like fintechs, I think the topic has in a way left the hype cycle and really starting to get into the real world, so to speak. And then the third proof point here is that the rails themselves, I think, are getting smarter a bit about the orchestration, right? The richer messaging, better data structure, and more instruction-ready flows means that payment carry context, compliance signals, and intent, just not amount and account. The pipe is becoming less dumb. So we are just not moving money faster, we are moving decision faster. And I think this is a super trend that is now going to really make impact in 2026. So value shifts to whoever writes the scripts and maybe even the AI. So if this is the shiny future, the next trend is sort of the really retro one. And I think it's to a large extent impacted by the geopolitical situation, as May actually pointed to, because this is actually starting to also impact, because a very difficult geopolitical situation, payments are actually critical. And that is why this trend is going to peak during 2026. So prepper payments offline is becoming premium. We have been talking about frictionless and invisible. The new premium works anyway. Resilience is the thing. And there are at least 3 examples of why this is a trend. First, Sweden, the most cashless country in the world. Now there is a deadline, 1st of July. It's now mandatory for essential goods to be able to be paid by offline cards, right? So 1st of July, for at least a week, you are, as a Swedish citizen, going to be, I would say, possible to use your card offline using the pen for more than a week. And also, we are being told that we need to have at least 4,000 kronor in cash at home. And the second one is basically that Europe is reclassifying payments as critical infrastructure, right? We bundle payments with energy grids and telecom. Resilience, sovereignty, continuous planning, that make, in a way, we had an outage, and I have an IT background myself. It was always an IT issue, right? Now it's more like a governance failure if things doesn't work. And the third proof point here is that also identity is going wallet native and offline. And this is an example for this is the European Digital Identity Wallet Framework that we launched by the end of this year. So it's about identity, authorization, consent. It moves very close to the transaction layer, which means that payments will get robust verification even if and when connectivity vanish. So if cashless used to be a signal of sophistication, I think the real status symbol in 2026 is your payments still work when the internet doesn't. So we have programmable money on one side, resilience on the other. They belong together, right? The more we automate and embed, the less society tolerate failure. And this is really the 2026 dynamic, smarter and tougher rails at the same time. So if you are a bank, a fintech, or a PSP, I would say now 2026 is governance, risk, market structure wrapped in technology. And remember where you heard all of this first, prepper payments. Thank you.
It's all outsourced to AI, how we're getting the sages and the data points and the trends. So we'll see, Lars. But that was, I think it's really good and very forward-looking, those things, and things that I hadn't thought so much about myself. Monica, you sit slightly different position in India talking about offline. Does anything of what Lars saying come as a surprise to you?
Offline payments does, because I love what he said, which is payments work when internet doesn't. But internet has become so pervasive that we actually have not seen many of the offline experiments do very well. And, India leads all real-time payments in the world, and now even digital payments. I'm just interested in knowing, and I know we can have a whole long, like 1 hour conversation, because I'd love to hear what Lars thinks about this. But this one for me really stands out in terms of a surprise.
Excellent. Yeah, you can
Thank
comment
you.
if you want to, Lars. That's fine.
No, but I think that the needle is moving, right? And I think that we are seeing that we will go in two different directions at the same time, because society today, we are so dependent on digital transactions. And India, you are more, I would say, real-time payments than the rest of the world together, right? So what happens if it start to break down? Resilience, as also May pointed to, I think that is the thing, and that's why I think prepper payments is actually going to be the new black, at least for some time, until the geopolitical situation has stabilized, and then we will move on to something else. That's how the world works.
Awesome, thank you very much. And I actually going to let the next speaker, Shriyanka, even comment on what Lars was saying before she gives us her prediction. Shriyanka, what comes up to you when you hear this?
I think Lars is spot on a number of these, and the way he backed up the trend with evidences. I think, indeed, if we were to look into the future and gaze into a crystal ball when it comes to payments, we would really look at 5 years ahead. But when we look at just the next year, I think, we know what's already being mobilized at this point. And I'm actually going to build on a number of things Lars put out there. When you look specifically at the way the big banks are moving, and I work at SWIFT, so we work with a number of these banks, and we can actually see what is the challenge that banks face, what are the risks, and thereby the trajectory or how the currents sway. So the very first one, in terms of a prediction, is around stablecoins. Lars, you touched upon tokenization and MiCA. In 2025, and if 2025 was the year of stablecoins, 2026 is going to be the year of tokenized deposits. And I say this because stablecoin market size capped, in terms of usage. We saw some of the largest IPOs with Circle, and jurisdictions crystallized regulations around it. So we saw the Genius Act emerge from the US, MiCA in Europe, and we see a whole agenda of central banks who are looking at tighter, more clearer regulatory frameworks to support the use of programmable money. But stablecoins also expose limits. They sit outside bank balance sheets, pull liquidity out of deposits, and sometimes raise hard questions when it comes to supervision and systemic risk. Tokenized deposits, on the other hand, follow the familiar legal structure and play within the prudential rules that existing deposits that sit within banks take on. So plays within the similar safety net of an actual bank deposit today, but also benefits from what stablecoin taught us, which is on-chain programmability, interoperability, and we will see tokenized deposits use cases go live this year. SWIFT is building a ledger with over 30 banks from 16 jurisdictions, and tokenized deposits will be one of the first use cases that go live on it. May, you spoke about geopolitics and resilience, and I'm going to take on a little bit of that as well. When you look at geopolitics, it's not just about financial fragmentation anymore. This is now escalated to a level where payments and critical infrastructure is at the threat of state-sponsored actors. Advanced persistent threats, or APTs as we call them, and to keep the surface of attack secure becomes a collective industry effort. Why? Because as we talk about interoperability, alternative rails, the more the number of rails, the more the endpoints, the more the surface area for attack. So that becomes the top security risk and top security spend, not only from payments infrastructures, but also endpoints, right? So how do you secure endpoints like consumers, people, banks, institutions, non-banks. So it's a collective exercise of raising the bar on cybersecurity and cyber risk. And central banks are doing that effectively, with cyber resilience become a core pillar of financial stability policy. 2026, I mean, I don't want to predict it, but a major outage from a financial infrastructure of sorts has a very high likelihood in terms of what it could materialize as a risk. And then in terms of, over 2025, 2026, and 2027, every time you think of 2027, in my head, I'm thinking the G20 targets, right? Because that has almost been a year, been a long journey of over 5 to 6 years of collective industry efforts. And when you look at those targets, there is very least likelihood of meeting those targets, whether you look at the speed dimension, cost, access, and it is across the different dimensions of wholesale, retail, and remittance. But 2026 might actually surprise us. And I say this because there are a number of private sector investments which will now mobilize. Nexus is there, which has multilateral, which leverages instant payment rails and forms a multilateral network. SWIFT is also going to go live with the scheme, which uses these instant payment rails as a last mile for connectivity, and you could actually see these large-scale efforts materialize and make a big push towards those targets. We may not reach it, but I think 2026 will be a good year for end users and multiple corridors when it comes to speed, cost, and transparency. And I specifically say cost because when we look at the scheme, what we're doing is, yes, there's not going to be a hidden FX fee, and there's going to be full value transparency in cost and all of those things which we've only dreamed about in the past. But yes, the banks are signing up for it. And it wouldn't have happened if there was not competition in markets and this whole push towards actually making 24/7 low-cost retail payments available on a wholesale network like SWIFT. So that's prediction plus roadmap summarized for you.
Thank you very much for that. It's scared, that outage is scary, but it's good to put it out there because it is a reality. I'm going to bring up the next slide of question, yes, when I'm saying something, and it's so great to have you on the call also to have that bird's eye view and seeing the flows going across markets. So thank you for that. And we have one question here: which regulatory focus do you think will most shape payments in 2026? And Monica, while people are voting on that one, do you also see this like the endpoint serving the end consumers, that is a trend that actually starting to come to effect and be reality, and something that we talked a lot about in the G20 project for the last 4 years?
Absolutely. And that's why Shriyanka's last point is really critical, specifically with regards to last mile connectivity, because if all of this has to come together, it's not like our payment rails have not existed. It is about the endpoints being able to make use of these speed related initiatives and improvements that have happened. And I feel that because of these multilateral and other connections that we spoke about, if payments has to become cost effective and reach those, specifically the financially excluded, then this could be the year. So I think this for me really does stand out. Because we've seen a lot of these initiatives happen over the past few years, but it seems that we needed the change to make this happen. So I think that's going to happen this year. So super excited about this.
Thank you. Interesting. Looking at the voting in front of us here, it's just our 2 new working groups. So this is great news. Yes, we're running slightly behind on time, so it's going to jump over to Nick. And Nick, tokenized deposit is something we've talked quite a bit about, but I don't know if that is in your crystal ball.
Well, you have to wait and find out. But let me say, right, like I have some really tough acts to follow. And I think, Camilla, you need some new board members, right? We're all too aligned. We can read one another's minds. So apologize in advance. There's going to be some form of repetition, right? But maybe to build on May's opening remarks, I mean, I genuinely believe, right, we are in an era of profound change. And like most of us, I think if you just watch the news for a couple of minutes, right, your head spins and, it may cause you some anxiety. But I think the flip side to that, and this is where my natural optimist mindset comes in, is that I think a lot of this change, it does present, opportunity, particularly for those of us that can separate signal from noise. And, for all the talk in the past 5 to 6 years about decentralization or the death of intermediaries, I actually do believe that the role of trusted intermediaries and partners will actually take on greater importance, right? And given this landscape that we need to collectively navigate. And I think for most of us, I mean, the reality is that this geopolitical fracturing or fragmentation that Shriyanka mentioned as well, it's not some distant theoretical risk. It's happening today. The events of 2025 or January 2026, I think they prove that these are commercial realities that that we're dealing with. So kudos to Amira, right, for front running some of these in her early 25 predictions. And I think right, like us payment practitioners and our clients, we're not innocent bystanders. I think Lars mentioned the point, we are at the very heart of the changes that we're seeing here. I mean, be that rewiring of supply chains, we see technology stacks bifurcating between East and West. Someone brought up the topic of competing payment rails. I think that was May, or various forms or proliferation of various forms of digital money, right? I think these are all, challenges that we're navigating. So I use the word challenge, but again, a hypothetical question. Some of these events, are they good? Are they bad? I think it really depends on who you ask. But I think one thing is clear to me as payment professionals, right? We can't keep our heads in the sand and hope for, one single magical universal payments protocol or standard. I think we, particularly as payment professionals, we just simply have to be realists. And I think we just have to plan for a world where, I think May use the word multipolar world, right? It's going to be multiple or even parallel systems running. And I think, don't get me wrong, I don't think this means that the world is necessarily going to be disconnected. I simply think that it's just going to be different connections, right? Be that on corridors, currencies, rails, or even someone mentioned different forms of money as well. And I think that's where maybe one of the first calls to action is that us, generally curious payment practitioners, where can we help, right? Ensuring that, value continues to move smoothly as well as safely, right? So, and I think there are various ways in which we see this being tackled, right? We see large-scale national pilots in multiple markets happening in Asia. BIS has led and is leading, a few projects touching on this thematic. Shriyanka, you mentioned Swift Ledger, so we're obviously one of the banks participating. We're quite excited about that. And there are also smaller scale pilots, right? And just maybe not to put my own organization too much, but we were quite proud to partner with Ant as well as Swift on a tokenized deposit interoperability pilot. So looking to do our part to see how we better manage within this fragmentation, right? So long story short, I do feel that my prediction for 26 is that we're just going to see even more bifurcation, and payments is not immune, right, to broader world events. But as a result of that, I think Shriyanka, you're the first person to use the word interoperability. Today, I'll be the second. We're going to see a lot more greater efforts, right, to drive this interoperability. We're going to see more pilots reach production stage. Some of these will be pilots, pure private sector efforts. Some will be public-private, and we may even see some native Web3 proposals come out in this space as well, right? So I think just to maybe echo Camilla and Monica's earlier remarks, right, there are a few working groups which have been set up. So I just really invite everyone listening in today, and I'm sure when this gets replayed, right, join our working groups and help us navigate this together. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Nick. And Monica, I'll come to you for comments that are going to let Pratush speak first, because we heard a lot from big organization now. Pratush is the CEO for Flip, which is smaller than Swift, if I dare to say. Is that okay, Pratush? It's smaller than HSBC, but still growing. So Pratush, what do you see at your end and your perspective?
Hi, everyone. I'm not sure if you can see me, but apologies for joining late first. Very interesting thoughts. I came in when Lars started speaking. It's very difficult to follow him because he's so structured and disciplined in his thoughts, right? But also, I heard Mrs. Horace speak, and as well as Nicholas. Nicholas is obviously the most pragmatic of the lot, I guess. But let me give you a little bit of on the ground take on my perspectives, right? I think there are three technologies that could be very game changing, but in this order of maturity, because they are in that order of maturity. But the filter, and the most important filter that I think is relevant here, is the one that Lars told about, the hype cycle, right? The first one is AI, as we keep on talking, and we have seen a few instances of that. But I personally think that AI has been out of the hype cycle now. It is where it is in our real lives, and forget about all the content creation, grok stuff. But in reality, we are already seeing issues. Somebody brought it up on the forum earlier, which was about fraud, right? Uh, we extensively use AI as a fraud detection and fraud management tool, but I think the use of AI for committing fraud itself is significantly increasing. Even at our small scale, because we do both domestic payments as well as cross-border transfers, somewhere overlapping between what SWIFT and HSBC do, we are seeing significantly large number of AI transactions, not only in terms of KYB or KYC, but also in terms of spoofing transactions themselves. It's crazy how AI is shaping, especially fraud management from the demand perspective, and I think it's going to get worse rather than better. There are several tools which are again evolving quite fast as we speak. I think the equilibrium will be met somewhere, but that's something we need to be realistic about. The second one is about tokenization, which is stable coins essentially. Again, that is starting to come out of the hype cycle. There was a lot of hype sometime last year when Block and Stripe put a lot of forces behind stablecoin. But I think now, as Ms. Ore mentioned, she was right that it is entering the realm of real usage, right? We are one of the first few to get the sandbox approval from Bank Indonesia in order to do this stablecoin as an intermediary for cross-border transactions. And it's interesting that regulators are also moving fast, which is why in your question that you shared on Slido, that was literally the first thing that was voted for, right? The third one, which I think is also relevant, but it hasn't yet got out of hype cycle, is quantum technology, because quantum computing drastically reduces, especially the core elements which power many of our existing technologies, including tokenization, etc. Right? And it drastically cuts. It just cuts it by orders of minutes. Right? It is not, in my mind, again, with a pinch of salt, it is not yet in a stage where it can disrupt productized technologies, but I think it's going there fast. And the problem with that would be that a lot of the underlying assumptions that we take about tokenization, stable coins, and overall for decentralized computing could face a huge wall, which again make us adopt a different kind of technology based on quantum computing, which again means the same difference as what banks started making apps or banks started making websites, right? So those are the three I generally want to talk about. But again, apologies for being late. And great views. I really love Lars's suggestions about looking at technologies which are getting out of that hype cycle and how they can disrupt us.
Awesome. Thank you, Pratush. We're just going to launch one more Slido question, and that is, what will drive real adoption of new payments capabilities in 2026? And while you vote on this, I'm turning to Monica. And does it surprise you, Monica, those different views depending what kind of organization you're sitting in? I mean, it's a lot of similarities, but we'll also see the details that you might see of what's going on.
Absolutely. I think for me, Nick mentioned the word interoperability, and I was glad that he followed on what Shriyanka had said, because for larger organizations, this becomes an imperative. And when we're talking about large versus small, we're not just talking in terms of the number of transactions, we're also talking in terms of the scale and resource investment. And that for me hits out because stands out actually, because as far as interoperability is is concerned, it's existed in the payments world since eons. In fact, it started out with that. And just recently, we've had a lot of conversations, specifically in the last 2 days, with regards to how interoperable systems are developing, which is actually causing disintermediation to incumbents who replaced interoperable systems. So it's like the entire cycle gets repeated, and interoperability this year, if it becomes a crucial lever, then I feel that this is going to be quite interesting to watch in terms of how other companies react. Another thing for me, though, is Web3. And Nick mentioned it very briefly, but I would have loved to double click on this as well. And I like what Pratyush said, because he already kind of alluded to how AI, and therefore what I would call technology related action that is happening on the payment side of the world, where we are already seeing this, and this becomes an action that companies now need to react to and take some action. Otherwise, they will be left behind. So it really does stand out for me that the scale of problems seems to have changed a little bit, but the priority areas also differs.
Thank you.
And I'm surprised by what I'm seeing on Slido. Are you, Camilla?
It's interesting, because I mean that better trust feels like that is such an obvious one when we're speaking about the scam experience that we all have had over the last year, I'm sure about. But then flip side is better user experience is maybe that indication that it is a trusted channel. So we could be philosophical about this one, but thank you everyone who's voting. Diving into, first I'm going to say also, Nick and Pratyush, thank you very much for being on the advisory board. We value the diversity we have, so thank you very much for that. Laurence, my French pronunciation is never spot on. Talk about diversity, you coming from Flint Global, being like this well-renowned policy house, talking global geopolitics day in, day out. We're very grateful to have you here today. What do you think will happen?
Thanks, and thanks for the intro and very good pronunciation. So well done on that one. It's obviously not easy to come after all the other great speakers and advisory board members and come and not be too repetitive. I'd say I agree with everything that the others shared, but I wanted to double click actually on one of the focus areas of the working groups on scams. It's already there, but I do believe that AI-powered scams will become even more pervasive and persuasive in 2026. Law enforcement is already seeing this in the wild. The FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center really warns already a couple of months ago that malicious actors have been impersonating senior officials, and the agency actually just bluntly advises that just do not assume it's authentic. So it's basically now assuming that it's fake until otherwise proven otherwise. Singapore, closer to home, also reported that the number of scam cases almost tripled in 2025, with government official impersonation scams one of the largest loss drivers. And I think all of us based in Singapore, the number of these calls that we get every day is just increasing phenomenally. I'd say, and as a result of that, I think also the AI powered nature of it will lead to those scams producing really high velocity losses that outpace legacy controls. So Australia Scam Watch, just to give you some numbers, in 2025 said there was more than 180,000 scams and financial losses of about 174 million in the first half alone, with regional phishing and electronic scam volumes like being very like increasing across the board. And it's really that velocity that is important there, especially when we're talking about real-time payments. If the velocity of the scams is increasing as well, that means that detections that relied on human verification or slow back-end checks will obviously be too late. And regulators will increase their focus and obviously increase their attention as as well. So we can expect supervisory focus on model validation for AI use cases. We already see that in Singapore with the ongoing MAS consultation, increasing focus on third-party contracts, incident reporting, and compliance will increasingly become operational and not just checkbox, which is another point that a lot of regulators have said. So the winners will really be the ones that combine those real-time controls and defensives, collective intelligence, and ironclad vendor governance. And yeah, I think there's really very much a role for EPAA to play there. So it's really great to see the working group that you have on the topic. So I'll leave it there in the interest of time.
Well, awesome, thank you. I have lots of comments on that also, but I'm going to I'm going to jump over to Nigel straight away. Thank you, Laurent. I want Nigel to get his minutes. Are you here, Nigel?
I'm here. Hey, Camilla, and great listening to the discussion. I joined slightly late, and I apologize, but I think I caught everything forward from May. And look, so Laurent, I completely agree with you on fraud and scams. I had three things that I thought were going to be interesting. Fraud and scams. I'm going to leave that one with you. You clearly are in the thick of it for sure, and I obviously have seen what's happening in Singapore too. But given I have a new remit, which is hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yep. Given I have a new remit now as the CEO in Tyro, I'm going to talk about two things that I think I'm seeing. One of them, which is what I would call noise, but it's going to be important noise through next year. And it is about agentic AI payments. I think we're going to see a lot of noise in the market. We talk about hype cycles in that space through 2026. And I think that's largely because it is nascent. I did some work with one of the PE companies to look at this space in particular. It is nascent, but we will see quite a lot of money going into this space, and it will throw up many of the challenges that actually Lawrence has just referred to, which is a lot of issues around being able to create identification effectively, being able to have counterparty risk associated with agentic AI models. I think it will become most valuably prevalent in the B2B space, and we'll probably see hubs and clearing hubs popping up and money flowing into that over this 26 period. So I expect that noise, and I call it noise because I don't think it's substantive in the context of affecting markets, that we'll see occurring. The bit that I will see, I think we will see happening, but we won't see it publicized, is that we will see, because of a push that I'm seeing in this new role that I've taken on board, whereby customers, merchants in particular, are demanding more than payments in the context of how they run their businesses. We are going to see increasingly banks quietly exit the end state payments with merchants in many, many markets. They won't announce it, they won't advertise it, but they'll move to become wholesale players as opposed to being retail related players to many, many, many businesses. And I think it's because they're realizing that they are not equipped to be able to deal with merchant backwards, and they're only equipped to deal with financial infrastructure forwards. I think we're beginning to see, we'll see, it'll be schizophrenic. We are going to see some banks double down on talking about how they're going to service business at the front end. JP Morgan's doing that with their JP Morgan Chase Ventures in the merchant space. But the flip side is we're going to see lots and lots of banks talking about how they service banks, but moving away from doing anything at the front end. And it's because they're unable to service this more than payment stack that is required in order to deliver value into merchants. You know, if you think about it, merchants want to make revenue, get paid, and run their businesses more efficiently. And if you think about where banks and financial services institutions play, they play in the payment space, but they often don't even play well enough in that space because they tend to only run on traditional card rails and maybe local debit networks, but everything else is a distraction that costs them money. So that's what I think agentic AI payments will be noise, but important noise for us to watch. And I think that we'll see the quiet movement of banks exiting the end state merchant touch points in many, many, many markets. Those are my two predictions.
Thank you so much. That's really interesting and quite different from everything else that had come up. It's really that strategic makeup of how the value chain of payments looks like. In an ideal scenario, we should have each of you as set the scene and then a round table and get all of the audience actually to join the discussion. I'm sure there's many that have lots of questions. I'm going to bring up the last slide though. Thank you, Nigel, so much for that. So we get this nice Wordle. I'm a big fan of Wordles. And then I'm going to get Monica to say, like, your whole take on this. Like, what are you taking away and what will you work on tomorrow within our EPA team that we need to nail this one? This is so important for the industry.
First thing would be to actually listen to the recording again. I think there's a lot that's been said, and I love the different vantage points that each advisory board member brings to this, whether it is a large scale bank or it is a fintech, or in this particular instance, merchants. And we didn't hear about the merchant side until Nigel joined in, and he makes such an interesting point, which, by the way, I think we will cover as we see many companies release their quarterly results. But the merchants moving on is actually showing us how it's becoming really difficult to manage the cost of payments. And that's why, for me, reduction of cost is what matters most to make payments successful. We've had so many conversations around this, and interoperability, agentic commerce, fraud, AI. I think we touched on not just those buzzwords, but also some of the trends. And I would not be surprised that at the end of this year that we uncover or unpack at least one or two more of these that would have come up simply because of the geopolitical situation, which is changing very, very quickly. And these are things that we have to take back. And since Nick has mentioned earlier, this is also a call to everybody who doesn't or hasn't heard this, but our working groups are specifically cutting across some of these particular keywords that you are seeing on the screen right now with the word cloud, and we'd love for you to all participate. But for me, I'm not surprised, resilience. May has said this. She was the first one to say resilience in the call. Camilla, what is that buzzword for you that you are seeing on screen that stands out that you were not expecting to be here?
I think I sort of expect one that I didn't hear a lot about, and it's always like you flavored from the conversation you're coming out of, is liquidity and focus on liquidity because shift of corridors and how it looks. That's something we haven't talked about so much before, but especially with either be like stablecoins being more prolific, that there is a need of that. So that's probably one that I'm missing a little bit. But otherwise, top of my mind is how we have this storm between scam, AI and real-time payments. We need to get those guardrails and frameworks right so that the industry can afford to innovate because of liabilities that could come with it. That is so interesting. So thank you very much, everyone. I was going to bring up a slide of our upcoming events so that you know there are quite a few. I specifically want to put that in Japan, we're actually talking about this specific topic of agentic AI and the guardrails and policy frameworks that needs to be in place when something goes wrong. Who is the payee and what, how long and in what context is the authentication? Good. We are full time, so I'm going to also one slide if you want to join our WhatsApp group. I think otherwise I actually haven't missed anything today. That is very rare for me. But last slide, scan here. This is just the broadcasting channel. It's not a spam. You get maybe a message a week or something for interesting stuff like today. So thank you everyone on the advisory board. Monica, thank you for co-hosting and the team behind it. Have a great Payments 2026. We hope to see you soon.